Welcome, my friend. Comment below where you are watching me from, and subscribe to the channel if you enjoy these stories. There are things we don't tell because they sound like lies. There are others we don't tell because they hurt too much. What I am going to tell you here is of both kinds. But I will tell it anyway, just as it is, with the voice I have left after Anthony went away and took with him the last thing I called my own. My name is Grace. Grace Egwu, 43 years old this past March. Hair more grey than black now. Rough hands of someone who has worked since she was 12. I have been a widow for 18 months. I am the mother of Mercy and Agnes, who were 8 and 6 years old when their father slipped from the roof he was repairing on a Friday of thin rain. The doctor said, "Instant death." I kept thinking that there are deaths that take longer than what actually dies, and that sometimes the one who stays is the one who dies slowly, installment by installment, like a debt that never ends. The house we lived in was rented. I knew that. Anthony knew it. But we kept postponing the conversation about buying land, about building, about the future. Like every poor couple postpones the things that matter because the present already weighs too much. When he died, the landlord gave me 2 months. He called it a kindness. Kindness. I kept the word in my throat like a seed that wouldn't go down. 2 months. 60 days. I counted them one by one, like someone counting the last grains of rice at the bottom of the bag. It was at the end of the 2nd month that Deborah appeared at my doorstep with a plate of food and a folded paper in her hand. Deborah was a distant cousin on my father's side. One of those cousins we only see at funerals. The last time I had seen her was at my father's burial, 8 years before, but there she was, with her hair tied up and that look of someone carrying bad news wrapped in a good deed. "There is a cabin," she said as I fed the girls, "in an old farm settlement in the savannah. It has been abandoned for a few years. The owner lives in Lagos and doesn't use it. You can stay there for a while without paying anything." She handed me the paper. It was a handwritten address, in tiny letters, with the name of a dirt road and the landmark of a red clay pit near an iroko tree. I looked at it and felt what someone who is drowning feels when a rope is thrown. You don't know if it is salvation or a trap, but you grab onto it. I grabbed it. The journey lasted nearly 6 hours on a mass transit bus, and another 2 hours hitched on a cattle truck heading in the right direction. The girls slept leaning against me, one on each side, with that deep sleep of children who still trust the world. I kept looking out the open window, feeling the red dust enter my mouth, my nose, embedding itself in my pores. The earth of the savannah has this color of an old wound, red like blood that has already dried. I thought it was a sign of something, but I couldn't tell of what. We arrived in the afternoon. The sun was in that low position that makes the shadow of things grow twice their size. The iroko tree that was the landmark was enormous, twisted, with roots coming out of the ground like fingers of buried people who still want to hold on to the world. And there, about 200 meters further, at the end of a dirt track that was barely a road, the cabin was not what I expected, but I also didn't really know what to expect. It was made of sun-dried mud bricks, with old corrugated sheets, and a small, rotten wooden window. On one of the sides, elephant grass had overgrown everywhere, dry grass leaning against the wall halfway up. The roof had sagged in one corner. The door was closed with a twisted wire that any child could open. Mercy looked at me and said nothing. Agnes asked if there would be ghosts. I said no. I lied with such firmness that I almost believed it myself. Inside, it smelled closed up, of old dampness, of stagnant things. There was a thick wooden table, 2 benches, and a clay stove that would need repairing. In the corner, a mattress was rolled up with a blanket on top, as if someone had slept there not long ago and left without tidying up. I didn't want to think about what that meant. I unpacked our things, laid the mattress in the center of the room, put the girls to sleep, and went to sit on the threshold, looking at the grass, hearing the wind move the elephant grass outside. The silence there was different from the silence of the city. The city has a background, cars passing, dogs barking, the neighbor's television. The silence there was too clean, too full, as if the place were holding its breath, as if the bush were listening. I kept thinking about Anthony. I did what we do when we want to cry, but the tears don't come. I took 3 deep breaths, looked up at the starry sky that was emerging, and told myself things would be different. But the first night proved me wrong. It was around midnight. I was almost asleep when I heard it. It wasn't the sound of an animal. An animal has a messy, irregular, living sound. This was different. It was heavy and mechanical, and it came from afar, a large truck, more than one, judging by the vibration I felt in the ground, even while lying down. I lay there for at least 20 minutes listening, without moving, with my arm around the girls. The sound grew, then vanished, then returned from another direction. The next morning, I went to check. On the road that passed some 300 meters above the cabin, there were deep tire marks of a heavy, loaded truck. The ground was still disturbed, the red earth overturned, the grass crushed to the side. Something big had passed through there during the night, without any lights. I kept looking at those tracks, as if they could explain something to me. They didn't, but they stayed in my head the way things we don't understand do, heavy and quiet, waiting for the moment to make sense. On the third night, Agnes shook my arm in the dark. She didn't say anything, she just pointed to the window. On the outside, something was tapping slowly against the rotten wood of the wall. It wasn't the wind, it was too regular, paused, like someone who knows they are being heard, and is in no hurry. I grabbed the cutlass the truck driver had left behind. I hadn't forgotten it. I kept it and went to the window. There was nothing, only the still grass and the moon in the middle of the sky, too bright, illuminating everything with that white light that doesn't warm. But my eyes cast downward and saw, near the old, well, about 10 meters from the back wall, there was something driven into the earth. I went outside with the cutlass in hand, barefoot, the cold and damp earth between my toes, and walked over. It was a small wooden cross, broken on the left arm, driven not very deep, as if someone had pushed it in a hurry. The wood was dark and old, but the jute knot holding the broken arm to the trunk was new, relatively new. Someone had been there recently and left it. I should have taken the girls and left. I didn't. I stood there in front of the cross for a long time. The wind came suddenly, the way the savanna wind does, seeming to rise from the ground rather than fall from the sky, and it rustled all the elephant grass around, a long whisper that ran across the entire field. I felt the smell of damp earth rising, the cold under my feet, the weight of the cutlass in my hand, and I thought of Anthony, the way he used to tell me when I was afraid of something. Grace, fear is a warning, not an answer. I answered him in silence there in the dark. I know, Anthony, but I have nowhere else to go. I went back inside, covered the girls, and lay with my eyes open until the sun rose. That was my first mistake. And I made it with my eyes wide open, knowing it was a mistake, as if the pain of staying were smaller than the pain of starting over. Sometimes a human being chooses the fear they already know over the fear of the new. Sometimes we stay not because we believe, but because we no longer have the faith to walk. The cross remained there. I stayed here, and the savanna remained quiet around it all, guarding its secrets with that enormous patience that only very old earth has. I learned early on that solitude has phases. First it hurts, then it numbs, then it becomes a habit, like a stone in your shoe that you stop feeling because the foot has calloused around it. What I didn't know was that there is a fourth phase, the one where solitude begins to feel like protection, where we prefer the emptiness to anything that might fill it, because filling it also means risking losing it again. I was in this fourth phase when Timothy appeared. I had been in the cabin for 11 days. 11 days of repairs, of stubbornness, of hands bleeding on rusty nails and knees scraped on broken tiles. I had patched the wall on the side where the dampness was getting in. I had replaced the rotten wood of the window with a plank I found behind the house. I had cleaned the clay stove with ash and coarse salt, as my grandmother had taught me, and managed to get a good fire going. I had cleared the grass leaning against the walls with the handle of a hoe I found in the bush, and in the process, I had sliced the palm of my right hand on a hidden rock among the roots. Mercy and Agnes helped me however they could. Mercy, being the older one, already had the serious look of someone who grew up too fast. She would sweep, fetch water from the well which was deep and dark, but had clean water, and keep an eye on her sister. Agnes was different. Agnes still had that childish insistence on being a child, despite everything. She would pick up colored stones in the yard, build little stick houses, and invent names for the lizards that appeared on the threshold. I looked at her sometimes and felt that strange mixture of gratitude and guilt that only a mother understands. Gratitude because she still knew how to play. Guilt because I had brought her here. That morning, I was outside the cabin, trying to fix the old fence that separated the yard from the thicker bush, when I heard the hooves. A horse on dry ground has a distinct, firm, spaced sound, with that muffled echo that hard earth returns differently than soft ground. I looked up the path. It was a large black horse, walking calmly. Atop it was a man. He wasn't young. He must have been in his late 50s. Maybe older, one of those men whom the field sun ages on the outside but preserves on the inside. He was tall, even while seated, broad-shouldered, wearing a worn leather hat. His shirt was a faded plaid. His riding trousers were stained with dry mud on the shins. He came slowly, without hurry, like someone who knows every inch of the path. He stopped about 15 meters from me. The horse stood still, only shaking its head once. The man looked at me, looked at the cabin, looked at the marks of my work on the fence, and looked back at me. All this without saying a word, with that kind of silence that isn't awkwardness, but evaluation. Then he spoke. "Why haven't you left yet?" It wasn't a threat, it was a question. The question of someone who already knows the answer and wants to see if the other person knows it too. I didn't lower my eyes. I learned from Anthony that keeping your head down in the fields is the wrong signal at the wrong time. "Because I have nowhere to go," I said, "and because this cabin needs fixing." He kept looking at me a bit longer. The sun was behind him, so I saw the shadow of his hat more than his features, but I saw the corner of his mouth move. Not exactly a smile, but that contraction of someone who heard something that confirmed what they thought. "Is the well water good?" he asked. "It is. Watch out for the rope. It's rotten in the middle." He turned his horse and left, without another word, without introducing himself, without explaining what he was doing there, without asking my name. He returned the following afternoon. This time he brought things. Tied to the saddle of his horse was a jute sack with rice, beans, gari, a bottle of oil, and a new, thick rope, still smelling of fresh jute. He dismounted without asking permission, tied his horse to the fence post I had repaired the day before, and placed the sack on the ground in front of the door. "I don't need charity," I said before he could open his mouth. "It's not charity," he replied without changing his tone. "It's neighborliness. I live 6 kilometers from here, down by the river. My name is Timothy." I let a silence pass. Then I told him mine. He nodded, as if noting it down. He took the new rope and went straight to the well without being invited. He replaced the old one with the new one, with the efficiency of someone who had done it 1,000 times. Correct knot, correct tension, well-secured ring. Then he came to where I was, washed his hands in the bucket, and looked at me with those dark eyes that had a way of seeing more than what was right in front of them. "This cabin," he said slowly, weighing each word, "used to be the home of people who vanished. The wind blew at that exact moment. The grass bent all to one side." "What do you mean, vanished?" I asked, and my voice came out firmer than I expected. "It means they lived here, and one day they didn't. They left without warning, without taking their things, without leaving an address." I looked at him. He looked at me. "And why are you telling me this?" "Because you seem like a woman of sense," he said. "And a woman of sense deserves to know where she stands." He took his hat, gave a short nod, untied his horse, and left by the same road he had come. I stood there with the bucket in hand, the sun on my neck, the smell of hot earth rising around me, and that phrase spinning in my head, like the rusty vanes of the windmill at the back of the yard. People who vanished. He returned twice more that week. He brought a new hoe on one of those times. On the other, he brought nothing. He just stopped at the edge of the road and stared at the cabin from afar for a while, as if calculating something. I saw him from the window. I didn't go out. I don't know why. I think I wanted to see what he did when he thought he wasn't being watched. He stayed for about 10 minutes, then left. On his 4th visit, he got off his horse and sat on the outdoor bench I had improvised with a wooden plank and 2 blocks of wood. I brought him water and some sugarcane pieces, because that was all I had to offer. He accepted without ceremony. It was that afternoon he told me about the gang. He spoke slowly, with that economy of words of someone who knows that too many words weaken the thing being said. He said that for years, men had been passing by on these roads in the middle of the night. Unmarked trucks, loaded with timber illegally taken from the deepest forest reserves of the savannah. The oldest, most valuable wood. He said they had been reported before, officers had come, but every time someone got too close to the operation, something happened. Either the informant vanished, or the evidence vanished, or both. "Who is in charge?" I asked. He took his time. He looked at the cup he was holding with both hands. "A man named Wilson," he paused. "Wilson Bacco. A scar on the right side of his face from a knife, a thick voice. He isn't from here, but he knows this land better than many who were born on it." He looked at me, and he doesn't forget a face. This man does not forgive anyone who crosses his path twice. We sat in silence for a while. The sun was going down, painting the entire savannah in that deep orange color that looks like a silent fire. The crickets had started. A white egret flew low, looking strange in that place. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked again. He watched the egret until it disappeared into the horizon. Then he looked at me. "Because you will need to know," he said, "sooner or later." He stood up, tapped his hat lightly against his thigh to shake off the dust, mounted his black horse with the fluid motion of someone who had done it all his life, and left. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay there listening to the savannah breathe, and the savannah really does breathe at night, with the crickets, the frogs, the wind that passes from time to time as if checking if everything is in its place. I thought about what Timothy had said. I thought about the cross near the well. I thought about the truck tracks on the road, and I thought about something I hadn't wanted to think about until then. Deborah, my distant cousin, who had appeared out of nowhere with a scribbled address, who hadn't asked about the place, who hadn't given me the owner's number, who had vanished, just as she had appeared. Why did she know about this cabin, and why did she send me here? The questions hung from the mud brick ceiling, while the wind rattled the wooden window, and the girls slept beside me with that sleep. I envied the sleep of those who haven't yet learned that the world has layers, and that beneath every quiet thing, there may be buried something that is not. Just as the cross was buried near the well, and just as I was to discover, many other things were buried in that red earth I had chosen to call my own. Or perhaps there is a moment when you are rebuilding your life from scratch, when your body stops asking if it's worth it and simply begins to do. It isn't courage. Courage involves a choice. This is something else. It is that blind instinct to keep going that God stitched inside us even before He stitched fear. The hand lifts the hoe because the hand knows it needs to lift it. The foot walks because stopping hurts more than moving forward. And so you go, without heroism, without speeches, just the day that is born, and the work that calls. That was how I ended up staying. In the first few weeks, I worked like I had never worked in my life, and I had already worked a lot. I would wake up before the sun, when the sky was still in that gray-blue color of hesitation, and start fixing what needed to be fixed. I repaired the roof with some corrugated sheets I found piled behind the house, covered in termites but still usable in the middle. I sealed the crack in the back wall with clay mixed with dry straw, the way I had seen my grandmother do when I was a girl. I cleared the yard stone by stone, root by root, until there was a flat space where the girls could walk without hurting their feet. I planted, that was the most important part. I planted okra, scent leaf, water leaf, and pumpkin leaves, from seeds I had saved in a small cloth bag I brought with me as if it were a treasure. And it was the most valuable thing I had. The earth there was good, dark, beneath the red topsoil, the kind of soil that accepts seeds with gratitude. In less than 2 weeks, there was green again speckling the garden bed. I would look at those sprouts every morning as if they were a promise, because they were. Timothy would show up from time to time. He never warned, and he never stayed long. He brought useful things, a roll of wire, a bag of salt, and once a live chicken tied by its leg, which the girls named Colonel before I could stop them. He would stay for half an hour at most. He spoke little and observed a lot. I began to learn his language, the language of a man of the fields who says more with silence than with words, who warns more with a look than with what he says. I learned, for example, that when he arrived and did not get off his horse, it was because he was in a hurry or had something heavy on his mind. I learned that when he dismounted and tied his horse to the post furthest from the door, it was because he was going to stay and talk about something that required time. And I learned that when he looked toward the road before speaking, it was because he was checking if anyone was on the way. He did that often, looking toward the road. I learned to do it too. It was on a morning of dry heat, the kind of heat that cracks your lips and makes the air shimmer over the ground, that it happened. It was the 4th week. I was digging near the well to expand the garden, because the shade that the nearby iroko tree cast at that hour of the morning was good for the vegetables. It protected them from the harshest sun. The earth near the well was different from the rest of the yard, darker, damper even in the dry weather, with that strong mineral smell that underground water leaves behind. I was digging slowly, methodically, lifting the hoe and bringing it down, lifting and bringing it down. In that rhythm, your body finds when it truly enters the work. Inside, the girls were there. Mercy was teaching Agnes how to write letters in a notebook. Timothy had brought on one of his visits. The hoe hit something. It wasn't the sound of a rock. A rock has a sharp, short click. This was a muffled, hollow sound, like wood or plastic. I stopped and knelt. I began to clear the dirt with my hands, slowly digging around whatever it was. It was a tin, a large one, like an 18-liter paint tin, sealed with its original lid and thick duct tape over it. Several wraps of that wide, gray tape used in construction. It was buried about 30 centimeters deep. The earth around it was slightly different from the older layers, a sign that someone had dug there relatively recently. A year, maybe 2, no more. I stared at it for a long time, kneeling, with dirt on my hands, the sun on my back, and sweat running down my neck. It could be anything hidden: money, poison, documents, drugs, things belonging to an honest person, or things belonging to someone who wasn't. My hand moved toward the tape. I stopped. I thought of Timothy. I thought of what he had said about people who vanished. I thought of the truck tracks on the road in the dead of night. I thought of the wooden cross with the new jute knot. I pulled my hand back. I covered the tin back up with dirt, slowly, just as it had been. I replaced every clod of earth. I stepped on it lightly, so as not to leave any fresh digging marks. Then I took the hoe, went back inside the cabin, washed my hands in the bucket, sat at the table, and stared into space for a time I couldn't measure. I didn't tell the girls. That afternoon, Timothy came, dismounted, and tied his horse to the furthest post. I served him water. We sat outside. The sun was going down, painting the savannah red, and the birds were in that commotion they always make before settling down to sleep, a beautiful, confused noise of wings and calls. I said, "I found something buried near the well." He didn't move. Only his eyes turned to me. A large tin, sealed. I didn't open it. Silence. He looked toward the road, then back at me. "You did the right thing," he said. "What is inside?" He remained quiet for a long time, the time it took for the last light of the sun to slip behind the savannah and for the sky to turn that deep purple that comes before the black. The cricket started up. "Evidence," he said at last. "Documents, photos, fake receipts, things someone kept because they knew they would need them one day." He paused. "Or things someone kept because they discovered too much and didn't know what else to do with what they knew." I let that sink in. Then I asked, "Is that person still alive?" He looked at me with those eyes that had learned not to reveal more than necessary. "I don't know," he said. And by the way he said it, I knew he did know, and that the answer was no. At that moment, I should have asked him to help me leave. I should have said, "Timothy, help me put the girls on a bus. Help me reach a town, any town, where I can disappear into the anonymity of the crowd and no one knows my face." I should have gone. I didn't. And that was the difference between my first mistake and my second. The first I made out of desperation, without a choice. The second I made with my eyes wide open, with a choice, knowing the weight of what I was deciding. I stayed because the garden was growing, because the girls had color back in their faces, because Agnes had made friends with Colonel the chicken and was sleeping peacefully, because I had repaired that cabin with my own hands, and it had begun to smell different. It smelled of new life, of fresh clay, of good firewood smoke. Because for the first time in 18 months, I would wake up in the morning and feel, deep down beneath the grief and the exhaustion, a tiny spark of something that wasn't joy, but was the shadow of joy, a sign that it still existed somewhere inside me. I stayed for all of that, and I stayed because Timothy, that night before mounting his horse and leaving, turned to me and said something that remained branded like iron on leather. Grace, it was the first time he had used my name, a woman who repairs a roof with bleeding hands and plants, a garden in soil. Everyone else abandoned is not a woman who runs easily, but there are times when staying requires more courage than leaving. "I want you to know I am by your side." He mounted and rode out into the dark. I stood there in the yard, with the cool night wind arriving, with the smell of earth and grass, and the smoke from the dying stove, with that sentence in my head, "I am by your side." When was the last time someone had said that to me? I went into the cabin, covered the girls, looked through the small window at the well outside, dark, quiet, with the new jute rope Timothy had replaced, and thought that this earth held secrets, held evidence, held perhaps the trace of a life that had ended badly, and I had decided to stay on top of all of it. I lay down and closed my eyes. Outside, the savannah kept breathing in the dark, slow and vast, like something in no hurry, because it knows time belongs to it. There are presences we feel before we see them. It isn't superstition. It isn't the nonsense of city people who read too many books. It is a thing of the body, an animal thing, that hair that stands up on the back of your neck, that chill that runs down your spine without any wind, that sudden silence of the creatures who know things we don't yet know. My grandmother called it the warning of the blood. She said the body is older than the soul, that it learned to sense danger long before we learned to name it. That afternoon, my body knew. It was a Thursday. I had spent the day cleaning the old animal pen behind the property, past the Iroko tree. It was small, made of posts and wire, but it was standing, and I had thought of getting 1 or 2 goats, animals that give milk, manure, and company, everything a woman alone with 2 daughters needs. I was sweeping the hard dirt floor of the pen when Colonel, Agnes's chicken, stopped scratching. Suddenly, he stood frozen in the middle of the yard, his head raised, that round, yellow eye pointed toward the road. I looked. There was a car parked up there on the edge of the dirt road. A dark SUV with tinted windows, the engine running, just sitting there, as if watching. I stayed where I was. I didn't run. I didn't flee. I kept holding the broom and looked back, slowly, without showing what I was feeling inside, which was a coldness that started in my stomach and rose to my throat like icy water. The car stayed for about 3 minutes. Then it drove off slowly, kicking up a long cloud of red dust that the wind carried into the bush. I went to fetch the girls inside and said nothing. He appeared 2 days later, on a morning of white sun and still air, of that pre-rain heat that presses on your head and makes everything smell of ozone and hot earth. I was at the front door peeling cassava I had gotten from a woman in the nearest village when I heard the car arrive. It wasn't the SUV. It was a regular sedan, silver, with no visible front license plate. It stopped right at the entrance of the yard, without ceremony, like someone who knows the place and knows they have a right to be there. The man who got out was about my height, but broad-shouldered, with a thick neck, the kind of body that has carried weight all its life. He wore a short-sleeved button-down shirt, trousers, and leather boots. He was well-dressed for the standards of that place, too well-dressed. He had short hair, graying at the temples, and on the right side of his face, running from the cheekbone down to near his jaw, was a wide, old, earth-colored scar. He walked slowly across the yard, looking around as if taking inventory, counting, measuring, assessing what belonged to whom. He looked at the garden, looked at the pen, looked at the well. His eyes lingered on the well for a second longer. Then he looked at me and smiled. It was a proper smile, all his teeth in the right place, but it didn't reach his eyes. The eyes of someone who smiles for real have a contraction at the corners, a tiny fold we can't control. His eyes were flat, like stagnant water, like a pool without wind. "Good morning," he said in a deep, smooth voice. "Are you Grace?" My stomach dropped. He knew my name. "I am," I said. My voice came out steady. I thank God to this day for that. "I am Wilson," he introduced himself, extending his hand. I shook it because not shaking it would be showing fear. And showing fear to this kind of man is the same as showing your neck. "I heard you were living here, and I wanted to drop by to welcome you." "Who told you?" I asked, using a direct tone out of nervousness. He noticed. The smile didn't change. "This region is small," he said as if it were an answer. "We all know one another." He stood there, hand in pocket, looking around the yard with the calm of someone who has plenty of time. His eyes returned to the well again. "Beautiful work," he said. "You've fixed up a lot of things here. I need a place for my girls." "Of course." He paused. "Your daughters, how old are they?" That chilled me. It wasn't a conversational question. It was a registration. It was the kind of question asked when someone wants to store information. "They are small," I said. He looked at me. For a moment, the smile vanished, and I saw what lay beneath it. It wasn't anger. It wasn't open cruelty. It was something worse. It was indifference. The kind of look that calculates without feeling. "You know," he said slowly, "this property has a complicated history." "I don't know anything," I said. "I only know that the cabin needed fixing and I needed a roof." "Of course," the smile returned. "But sometimes we arrive at a place and see things we weren't expecting to see." Those flat eyes went to the well one last time. "And then we find ourselves in a complicated situation." "Do you understand me?" I understood. I understood every syllable, every pause, every calculated look at the well. He knew about the tin, or suspected it, or wanted to know if I knew. "I haven't found anything of interest here," I said. "Dirt, grass, and hard work is what is here." He looked at me for what felt like a very long time. "That's good," he said at last. "Good for everyone." He turned and walked slowly back to the car, opened the door, and got in. Before closing it, he turned to me one last time. "I know who you are, Grace." He said my name, the way one says the name of something they hold in their hand. "And I know what you saw." He closed the door. The car drove off down the dirt road, without haste, just as it had arrived. I stood in the yard until the sound of the engine completely disappeared. Then I went inside, sat on the bench, placed my hands on the table, and looked at them. They were shaking. Not much, but shaking. Mercy appeared at the bedroom door, looking at me. She was 8, but she had that look of an old child who sees what adults try to hide. "Mama," she said softly. "Who was that?" "A neighbor," I said. She didn't believe me, but she didn't ask further. That night, I lit the hurricane lamp very low, almost out, and wrote a letter to Timothy. There was no way to send it. I had no address. And there was no way to go to his farm at night. but I wrote it anyway, because sometimes we need to put our thoughts outside our heads to be able to see them. I wrote what had happened. I wrote what Wilson had said. I wrote that he had looked at the well 3 times. I folded the paper and slipped it into my apron pocket. Then I did what every mother does when the danger is great and the options are few. I went to check if the girls were sleeping. I covered Agnes, who had kicked her blanket down. I stood there for a while looking at them in the dark, listening to their quiet breathing, and felt that thing you only feel when love has no way out, a mixture of strength and terror that fills your entire chest and leaves room for nothing else. I went back to the living room, picked up the cutlass, placed it beside my bed, and lay down without sleeping. Outside, the savannah was restless that night. The animals were different, the frogs quieter, the crickets stopping and starting at irregular intervals, the way they do when things are moving in the bush and they are on alert. I knew that pattern. I had learned to recognize it in the weeks I had been there. The savannah has its own grammar, and when the grammar changes, it is because something changed first. Around midnight, I heard the car. It didn't stop nearby. It passed slowly along the road up there, the engine low, without headlights. It passed once, then came back, then vanished. I lay there with the cutlass in my hand until the day broke. Timothy appeared in the middle of the following morning, before I could go looking for him. He dismounted quickly, tied his horse to the usual post, and came toward me with a faster step than was normal for him. I saw in his eyes, even before he spoke, that he knew. Wilson was here, I said before he could open his mouth. He closed his eyes for a second, opened them, and nodded. I heard yesterday afternoon. I should have come sooner. His voice was different, tighter, with the weight of someone carrying guilt. What did he say? I told him everything, every word, every look at the well. The final sentence. Timothy listened with his arms crossed, his eyes on the ground, his jaw clenched. When I finished, he remained quiet for a long time. "Grace," he said at last, and his voice had that gravity of something important arriving. "I need to tell you something. I should have told you before, but I didn't because I thought it would scare you, and I needed you to stay." I looked at him. "You needed me to stay for what?" He took a deep breath, looked toward the road, then back at me. "The tin you found near the well." He paused. "I know what's inside, because I was the one who buried it." The world went quiet around the two of us for a moment I couldn't measure. The wind stopped, the cricket stopped, even the horse stood motionless. I looked at that man who had brought me rope, a hoe, rice, and a live chicken, who had told me, "I am by your side," and I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. Not out of fear, and not out of anger yet, but with that dizziness of someone who realizes the story they were living has a different size than they thought, that it has walls they hadn't seen. "Then start from the beginning," I said, "and don't stop in the middle." He nodded and began. "There are confessions that free the one who speaks. There are confessions that weigh more on the one who listens than they did on the one who carried them. Timothy's was of the second kind. He told me while sitting on the outdoor bench, with his elbows on his knees and his hat in his hands, turning his hat slowly through his fingers, like someone who needs something to hold on to while letting go of something else. The sun was strong and white, that mid-morning white that leaves no good shade anywhere. Sweat ran down his temple. I didn't offer him water, not because of cruelty, but because something in me understood that he needed to speak without stopping, that an interruption might close the door he was opening with such effort. He told me he had known that cabin for more than 15 years, and that the man who lived there before was named Daniel. Daniel Akpan, 58 years old, a widower, with no children, a quiet man who raised some lean cattle, planted cassava, and bothered no one. He said Daniel had started noticing the midnight movements about 3 years ago, the trucks without lights, the overturned roads, the wood disappearing from the deepest reserves. He said Daniel had written it all down: license plates, times, frequency, direction. He had taken photos with an old mobile phone, poorly focused, from afar, but enough. He had stored it all in a paint tin, buried near the well, because he trusted no one and didn't know who to hand it to. "And then," I said when he stopped. "Then he vanished," Timothy said. "One day his dog was barking on the edge of the road, alone, without his owner. The cabin door was open, the stove was still lit, with soup on the fire." He paused. "He was never seen again." I stared at him. "And you knew all of this?" I said slowly. "And even so, you let Deborah send me here?" He didn't look away. That was the moment I respected him and hated him at the same time. "I needed someone to live here," he said. "Someone who would be a living witness, a constant presence. As long as the cabin was empty, Wilson could do whatever he wanted on this land without anyone knowing. With someone living here, he had to be careful. And if I could get to the tin with a witness, With someone who could back it up, the evidence would have more weight. You used my daughters as a shield, I said. The word shield hung in the air like a spark before a fire. Not as a shield, he said, and his voice cracked slightly. The first crack I had ever seen in that man of stone as an anchor. Because I needed a reason to keep going, and you needed land to stand on. I thought it could be both at the same time. You thought wrong. I know. Silence. The wind came from afar and brought the smell of rain, that damp, electric smell that arrives long before the rain, when it is still on the horizon, deciding whether to come. I looked at the sky. In the west, a wall of dark clouds was growing slowly. Those high afternoon clouds that in the savannah can turn into a storm in 40 minutes. What exactly is in the tin? I asked. Photos. A notebook with Daniel's notes. 2 fake receipts with names of front companies the gang used to launder the timber money, and a USB drive. Enough evidence to lock up Wilson and 6 others. Yes, he paused, if it reaches the right hands. And why hasn't it reached them yet? He looked at me with that weight in his eyes of someone who had carried something for too long, because I tried once. I contacted an officer at Nisrea whom I thought was trustworthy. A long pause. 2 days later, one of the dogs on my farm was found dead at my doorstep with a note underneath. I didn't need to ask what the note said. So you understand, he said. It isn't simple. It isn't just going to the nearest police station. These men have roots in places we can't see. They have people on the inside. I remained quiet for a while. The smell of rain was stronger. The sky to the west was almost black now, that huge cloud growing with the menacing slowness of something certain of its own strength. So, what do you want me to do? I asked. I want you to help me dig up the tin and take it to someone in Abuja, a journalist. Someone who isn't afraid and who has no debts to Wilson. He looked at me, but it has to be fast. After his visit yesterday, we don't have much time. I looked at the well, looked at the bush, looked at the sky that was turning into night ahead of time. When? I asked. Tomorrow morning early, before the sun. He stood up, put on his hat. Tonight, do not open the door for anyone. For anyone. Grace, even if you recognize the voice. He mounted his horse. Before leaving, he stopped. I was wrong not to tell you sooner. That I know, and I carry. But I wasn't wrong to choose you. A pause. A woman who stands after everything you've been through doesn't fall easily. He rode away. The dust his horse kicked up merged with the first cold wind of the storm that was arriving. I had dinner with the girls earlier than usual. I made what we had, rice, beans, a fried egg. Agnes talked about Colonel, who had lunged at a lizard and missed, and laughed alone at the story. Mercy kept looking at me during the meal with those eyes that saw too much. After dinner, I told them they were going to sleep early, because the next day we were leaving before the sun. Where to? Mercy asked. To see a place, I said. Are we leaving here? I looked at her, at that 8-year-old girl who had her father's face and her grandmother's eyes, and who had spent the last 18 months watching me rebuild life brick by brick, without complaining once. I don't know yet, I said, but we will be together. Is that okay? She nodded. She wasn't satisfied, but she accepted. A child who trusts her mother accepts what her mother offers, even when it isn't enough. I covered them both. I sat on the edge of their bed, listening to their breathing deepen while outside the storm arrived. It hit fully at 10 at night. First the wind, that wind of a storm front that isn't a breeze, but a wall that bends the grass flat to the ground, tears leaves from branches, and brings the smell of wet earth from afar, mixed with the smell of lightning. Then the thunder, low at first, a distant rumble that grew until it made the roof tiles rattle. Then the rain. It wasn't rain. It was the kind of thing we don't call rain in the country. It was a deluge. It was the sky turning upside down, thick, fast water hammering the roof with the sound of war, which in 2 minutes created new streams in the yard, drowning out every sound but itself. I stayed in the living room with the hurricane lamp off, sitting on the chair near the window with the cutlass in my lap, listening to the storm. That was when I saw the lights. They weren't lightning. Lightning illuminates everything at once, white for a fraction of a second. These lights were yellow, focused, and came from the road up there, headlights of cars, more than one, descending slowly toward the cabin. I stood up, went to the girls' room, and shook Mercy. Mercy, get up quietly. She woke up without making a sound, that quick waking of someone who has learned not to be surprised by danger. I lifted Agnes in my arms, still sleeping. Mercy picked up her shoes without me having to ask. I went to the back door, the one that led to the pen and the bush, and opened it slowly. The rain hit me all at once, cold, heavy, blinding. I went out anyway. Mercy came behind, her hand gripping my wrapper. Behind us, I heard the front door open. It wasn't broken down. It was opened with a key. A sharp, metallic click of someone who had a copy. That was more terrifying than if they had broken the door, because it meant they had planned it, that they knew, that they had always known. I ran with Agnes in my arms and Mercy in my hand. I entered the bush from behind, barefoot, the rain washing everything away, the ground slipping beneath our feet. Agnes woke up in the middle of the run and stayed quiet. I don't know if from fear or from something a child understands without words. Mercy ran beside me without letting go of my hand, without crying, with that 8-year-old courage that makes the heart bend to watch. I heard voices behind us, men, more than one. The bush was dark and wet, and leaves cut our faces while low branches snagged our hair, but I knew a bit of that path. I had walked through there a few times during the day, gathering firewood, and my body had kept the map, even if my head hadn't mapped it carefully. Then the ground disappeared beneath my right foot. I felt the slope before I saw it. My foot slipped, my knee buckled. I tried to steady myself and couldn't, and I went rolling down, holding Agnes close, trying to protect her head with my arm, while the world spun and mud got into my mouth and the rain wouldn't stop. I stopped at the bottom of the slope, about a 3-meter fall, with wet earth and leaves cushioning the impact. I lay there for a second that felt like a minute, dizzy, checking Agnes. She was crying now, quietly, her face buried in my neck. Agnes, look at me. Are you okay? She nodded, crying. I looked up the slope. Mercy wasn't there. My heart stopped. Mercy, I whispered as loud as I could without shouting. Silence. Rain. Thunder. Mercy. Mama. The voice came from my right, not from above. She had slid down another part of the slope and had stopped about 4 meters from me, holding onto a thick tree root coming out of the bank. She was covered in mud, her knee bleeding, but she was on her feet. I collapsed inside and pulled myself together at the same time, which is what a mother does. I crawled to her, pulled her close, and spent a few seconds with both arms around the two of them, there at the bottom of that slope, in the rain, in the dark, with men up there searching for us. Then, I heard something else, a sharp, single gunshot coming from the direction of the cabin, then a different kind of silence, then more agitated voices, then the sound of someone coming down the slope on the other side, slowly, with knowledge of the terrain. Not with the haste of someone pursuing, but with the care of someone searching. I pressed the girls close, holding the cutlass. Grace, Timothy's voice. He came down to us with a flashlight covered by his hand, letting through only a sliver of light that didn't go far. He was soaked, with a cut on his face, and the left side of his shirt dark with something that, in the rain, I couldn't tell if it was mud or blood, but he was on his feet. He was reaching us. Are you okay? He said, crouching in front of us. We are, I said, and my voice trembled for the first time in that whole night. He looked at the girls, looked at me. There was a very short moment there where that hard face of a man who had lost everything looked different. It looked just human, just relieved, just present. Wilson? I asked. Detained, he said. I arrived before them. I had a contact in the police in Abuja, not here, but there, whom I contacted yesterday afternoon after I left. They arrived with the storm. He paused. But Wilson managed to get into the cabin first. He was the one who shot first. And you? He looked at the dark side of his shirt. It grazed me, he said. It's nothing. It was, but it wasn't the time. The Abuja police took 4 hours to process the scene, round up the men, call the authorities, take photos, do what needed to be done. I stayed with the girls inside a police patrol vehicle, with the heater on, wrapped in a blanket that one of the officers had in the trunk, drinking tea from a thermos flask, that the inspector, a woman with short hair and a dry voice who seemed like good people to me, had brought. Agnes fell asleep on my lap inside the vehicle. Mercy stayed awake, leaning against me, watching the movement outside through the window, without asking questions. Timothy was taken to the hospital before dawn, in an ambulance. He went with his hand pressed against his wound, and that look of a man who doesn't quite know how to let himself be cared for. Before getting into the ambulance, he looked at me from afar. I raised my hand, not exactly a wave, but a gesture of recognition. He closed his eyes for a second, opened them, and went. The rain stopped around 4 in the morning. The savannah went quiet after it, that damp, clean quietness that comes after a great storm, when the air is washed and the earth is satisfied and even the crickets are resting. I got out of the police vehicle and walked to the edge of the yard. The cabin was standing. It had a broken window, mud marks on the walls, and the front door wide open with a bent hinge, but it was standing. The garden beds were all flattened by the rain. Colonel, Agnes's chicken, was wet and indignant in a corner of the yard, but alive. And there, near the well, illuminated by the flashlight I was still holding in my hand, the earth was overturned. Someone had tried to dig during the confusion of the night, but the tin was still there, in a deeper layer than they had dug, in the place where Timothy had buried it with enough care. I stood looking at the well for a while. I thought of Daniel, who had written everything down in a notebook before vanishing. I thought of the enormous risk that Quiet Man had taken, without knowing it would cost what it did. I thought that his notebook was in that tin, and that his notebook still spoke, and that sometimes the voice of those who were silenced finds a way to continue. That comforted me in a way I can't quite explain. I went back inside the police car, put my arms around the girls, and closed my eyes. The last thing I thought before falling asleep was that the cabin still smelled of fresh clay and firewood, the smell I had helped create with my own hands, and that this smell was now mixed with rain and washed earth and beginnings. The smell of a beginning. They say time heals. I don't think it's quite like that. I think time doesn't heal. Time teaches you how to carry, which is different. Healing would mean forgetting the weight, walking lightly as if you had never carried anything. Carrying is something else. It is learning the exact balance, finding the right way to distribute what hurts, so that it doesn't twist your spine, doesn't bend your walk, doesn't stop you from moving forward. We don't get rid of the wound. We learn to walk with it until it becomes part of our step. That was what I learned on that patch of red earth in the savannah. Not to forget, but to carry differently. Wilson Bacco was arrested that night along with 5 other men of the gang. The tin was dug up by the police the following morning, catalogued, photographed, and delivered to the Federal High Court in Abuja. Daniel's notebook, that quiet man I had never known, who had written everything down in tiny handwriting, like someone who knew what they were doing, became the centerpiece of the prosecution. The fake receipts, the blurry photos taken from afar with an old phone, the USB drive with audio recordings that no one knew existed, it all did the work Daniel had planned for it to do before he vanished. Never did they find his body. That remained as an open wound in the trial, and it remained as an open wound in me, because I lived in his house, slept under the roof he had built, drank the water from the well he had dug, and never even knew his name until the inspector told me. It feels like a particular kind of injustice to be saved by someone who doesn't know they saved you. The trial lasted nearly 2 years. I was called to testify 3 times. The first time, my hands shook so much as I signed the papers that the clerk looked at me with that professional pity of someone who has seen terrified people before. The second time, I went without shaking. The third time, I went with Mercy, who was 10 by then, and whom I felt needed to see. She needed to understand that the world has darkness, but it also has this imperfect, slow, and sometimes unjust, but real mechanism of trying to settle accounts. Wilson was sentenced to 23 years. The others received between 8 and 15. The front company was shut down. The reserve they were destroying was declared a permanent conservation area due to pressure from the journalist in Abuja, the one Timothy had mentioned, who received the story and published it as a series, winning an award for it in a place whose name I never quite knew, but which the inspector told me was important. Daniel's name appeared in the newspapers. Just that, just his name, but it appeared. Timothy spent 12 days in the hospital. The bullet had entered the left side of his abdomen and exited through his back, without hitting anything that couldn't recover what the doctor called a statistical miracle, and what I called by the name I learned from my grandmother, Grace. I went to visit him once during the first week. The girls stayed with Inspector Chioma, who had turned into a kind of wingless angel in those days. I entered the hospital room with that strong smell of antiseptic that seems to stick to your clothes, and found I had him sitting in bed, paler than I had ever seen him, with a white bandage on his side, reading an old almanac someone had left behind. He saw me enter and lowered the almanac. I stood near the door for a second, then pulled up the chair and sat down. We stayed in silence for a reasonable amount of time. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of people who had been through something huge together and were still processing the scale of what they had passed. "You should have told me," I said at last. "I should have," he said. "You used me." "I did." He paused. "I regret the way I did it. I don't regret the result." I looked at him. At that hard face I had learned to read over the past months, the line of his mouth when he was calculating, the shift of his gaze when he was weighing words, the slight contraction of his forehead when something worried him, a face that had lost much, that carried loss just as I carried mine, only in a different way. Why was the cabin empty when I arrived? I asked. Before Daniel. Who lived there? He looked at his hands. My sister, he said, and her husband. 2 children. A long pause. Wilson wasn't just interested in Daniel. He was interested in anyone who was on that land and could see what he didn't want them to see. My sister saw and told her husband. Her husband went to complain. He stopped, then restarted. That was before Daniel, 6 years ago. I said nothing. There was nothing to say. So, it wasn't just Daniel who saved me, I said after a while. No, it was your sister too, without knowing. He closed his eyes. When he opened them, there was something different inside. Not exactly peace, but that thing that remains after the pain is finally spoken aloud, named, recognized by another person. Yes, he said, without knowing. I stayed a bit longer. When I stood up to leave, he spoke. Grace. The farm he hesitated, which was rare for him, isn't just the cabin. There are 20 more acres around it. Good land with water. I have no heir, no family to use it. He paused. You and the girls could stay, for real, with the deed, with the survey, with your name on the paper. I looked at him for a long time. Why? I asked. Because you fixed what was broken, he said simply, and because that land needs people who know the value of soil. I left without answering, but I left thinking. I went back to the cabin that afternoon, entered alone. The girls were still with Chioma. I walked slowly through the rooms, running my hand along the walls I had patched, the clay stove I had cleaned with ash and coarse salt, the new window I had put in place of the rotten one. I went to the garden bed that the storm had flattened. It was already recovering, the green shoots returning, the earth dark and still damp from the great rain. I went to the well. The new jute rope Timothy had replaced was still there, firm, with the correct knot. I looked into the well. The water deep down, dark, quiet, reflecting a long, narrow strip of blue sky. And then I looked to the side. The wooden cross was still there. The small one, broken on the left arm, with the jute knot that had been new when I arrived, and was now turning dark from the sun and rain. I had never removed it, had never gone near it again since that night, but there it stood, firm in the ground, just as it had been since before I arrived, and as it would be after I was gone. If I went, I knelt in front of it. I thought of Daniel. I thought of Timothy's sister, her husband, and their 2 children. I thought of Anthony slipping from the roof on a Friday of thin rain. I thought of everything that land had seen and kept, everything it had buried and everything it had made grow, despite everything. And I prayed. I didn't pray with beautiful words or correct formulas. I prayed the way I learned in the village, direct, simple, without intermediaries. The kind of prayer you speak softly into the earth, because you believe the earth listens. I prayed for those who had gone. I prayed for the girls. I prayed for myself. When I stood up, the sun was in that late afternoon position I had learned to recognize in that corner of the world, that low orange light that hits everything from the side, making the shadow of the grass grow huge on the ground and tinting the clouds with pink and purple on the horizon. The most beautiful hour of the savannah, the hour that always made me stop whenever I was working, lean on my hoe or my cutlass, and just look for a minute, just taking it in, because there are things work cannot do, only beauty can. I stood still like that for a long time. Then I went back inside, lit the stove, and began to make dinner. We stayed. It wasn't a decision made in one day. It was a decision that made itself over weeks, like the garden that grew without me having to watch it. I prepared the soil, planted the seeds, and the rest happened because it was what had to happen. Timothy left the hospital and went back to his farm, 6 kilometers upriver, but he began to visit more often. Not every week, sometimes yes, sometimes every 15 days, and when he came, he stayed longer. He helped with what needed help. He would sit on the outdoor bench and drink tea or water, and stay in silence in his way, which I had learned not to try to fill. I don't know exactly what we were to each other. It wasn't a storybook love. It wasn't that thing that explodes and overflows. It was something else. It was 2 people who had survived similar losses, each in their own way, and who had found in each other's company a kind of silent support, like 2 fence posts leaning against one another, without either needing to admit they needed the support. Mercy went to school in the nearest village, 6 kilometers of dirt road. Agnes went with her. I bought 2 goats, named, at Agnes's insistence, Taylor and Doctor names, whose origin I still don't understand to this day. And Colonel reigned in the yard with that arrogance of a chicken who never learned he was a chicken. The land grew. The garden became serious business. I sold the surplus in the village, traded for other things, and gradually wove that small web of survival that those who live in the country know, where no one has much, but no one leaves another without the essentials. And I learned that land, learned its smells. The smell of the coming rain, the smell of dry earth asking for water, the smell of distant fire warning us to be alert. I learned its sounds which birds sing early in the morning, the sound the wind makes when it is going to turn into a storm, how the silence of the crickets is different when there is a large animal in the bush. I learned, and the land taught me. That is what it means to live in a place, not just to be there, but to learn the language the place speaks. Wilson tried to get revenge for his arrest. I hadn't expected that, though I should have. He sent a message from the inside. I don't know how, I don't know through whom. That kind of man has strings we can't see. A man I had never seen before appeared in the village asking about me. Inspector Chioma found out and warned me. 2 days later, during a night of dry heat, the cabin caught fire. Not all of it. The fire started at the back wall, near the pen. I woke up to the smell of smoke. We wake up even before we understand why. It is an old instinct. I woke up, saw the glow through the window, and shouted to the girls. We got out in less than a minute. I lost part of the back wall. I lost half the roof. I lost the new window I had installed. The pen remained untouched. The garden remained untouched. The goats remained untouched. Colonel remained untouched, indignant and noisy, as always. I stood in the yard, watching the fire being put out. Inspector Chioma had arrived with people from the village in less than half an hour. That chain of help the country has when needed, people you barely know who show up with buckets and determination. I watched and felt, in the midst of it all, a strange thing. I felt anger, of course. I felt a lingering fear, that fear that comes after, when the danger has passed and the body remembers it had a reason to tremble. But I also felt, and this surprised me, a kind of clarity. Because I had fixed that cabin once, I could fix it again, and this time I was going to fix it bigger. Was it Timothy who brought the idea? Or was it me? Or both of us at the same time? In those long afternoon conversations, you can never really tell where what comes from. The idea was simple: to use that land, that rebuilt cabin, that space that had seen so much heavy history, for something that was the opposite of what it had been. It took us nearly a year to build. Timothy contributed the land. He signed the deed at the local government registry, my name and the girls on the paper, as he had promised in the hospital. I contributed the work, the stubbornness, that ability to fix things I had discovered in myself when I had no other choice. Inspector Chioma contributed contacts. She knew people in the state government, knew women who knew how to write project proposals, knew who to go to for funding. We called it the House of New Beginnings, a simple name, without excessive romance, because things that work don't need fancy names. It was a shelter for women widows, mothers who had fled, women who had lost everything and no longer knew who they were outside of their loss, who arrived with heavy suitcases, not of clothes, but of history, who arrived with hollow eyes from looking into the abyss for too long. I would receive them at the door. I knew how to receive them, because I had arrived the same way, not knowing what face to make, not knowing if it was right to be there carrying a shame that wasn't mine, but which I had kept as if it were. I said to them what no one had said to me when I needed it. You can stay. There is ground here. The wooden cross is still there. Near the well, in the same place, a little darker from the sun and time, the broken arm still tied with the jute knot, which has grown darker with each rain. I have never removed it. The women who arrive sometimes ask what it is. I tell them it is a memory, that it belongs to the man who lived here before and was silenced, and whose voice found a way to continue anyway. Some look at me without quite understanding. Others understand without me needing to explain further. There is one thing I know now, after everything, that I didn't know when Deborah appeared at my door with the folded paper in her hand. There is no neutral land. Every piece of ground carries what happened on it: the joy, the blood, the sweat, the forced silence, the cry no one heard. We don't erase that. We don't fix that with lime and paint and a new roof. But we can do something else. We can plant over it. We can let the new root go deep to where the old root went, and grow from a place that already knows what pain is. And because of that, grow firmer. That was what we did. Every reconstruction is born where something ended. Every hope has the address of some ruin. And every woman who learns to stand after everything pushed her to the ground, that woman carries inside herself a cabin that no one else can burn. That I learned on that red earth of the savannah, which almost swallowed me, and which I learned to call my own, that I carry forever. The end.